I got a whole lot of emails after the toothpaste like, E.T., how you stay pumped up? How do you personally stay pumped up, stay on fire? E, it's like you a fire, bruh. How do you stay low?
A quote-unquote hip-hop preacher on YouTube probably isn't the first source of sample material you'd think of for any song, let alone a toe-tapping dance floor heater. But this is just one of many reasons why Settle, the debut album by Disclosure, no, not the Demi Moore movie, remains an excellent body of work almost 11 years later. And since 2023 just wrapped up, I'd like to take this opportunity to look back on my favorite album to hit the 10-year milestone over the past year. Disclosure are a British duo comprised of brothers Guy and Howard Lawrence. Already riding a wave of hype before their first album dropped, the brothers quickly found themselves catapulted among dance music's elite after Settle came out, experiencing commercial success in both dance and pop circles. Settle also turned out to be a game-changing record for dance music at large, especially since during those first couple years of the 2010s, this is what EDM sounded like. Compared to these and many other big tracks from that dance music zeitgeist, Settle felt like an overdue breath of fresh air. The more classic deep house and garage-inspired album helped increase those genres' influence on dance and pop music, during an era where maximalist 128 BPM big room house and the more hard-hitting variant of dubstep known derisively as brostep reigned supreme commercially. Settle came at just the right time for that EDM boom, while also arguably helping signal the beginning of its end. So how did the brothers Lawrence bring house music back to its relative basics, helping them to become a dance music force and release an excellent debut album that still holds up nicely a decade and change later? Let's find out. Guy and Howard Lawrence grew up in Reigate, a 21,000-ish population town roughly 30 kilometers, or 19 miles, south of London, in Surrey. The brothers, who are 3 years apart in age, are the sons of musician parents. Their father played guitar in a rock band that frequently toured Canada during the 80s, and their mother is a singer and pianist who's performed on cruise ships and for British troops in the Falkland Islands, as well as doing jingles for ads. Thanks to their parents' love of music, both brothers grew up with its influence constantly surrounding them. Though their mom played musicals around the house, which Guy says he hates, as well as pop music, their dad loved bands like Rush and Genesis, the latter of whom's music helped Guy learn to play drums as early as age 3. Meanwhile, Howard picked up the bass guitar at age 6, and the brothers heavily incorporate both instruments into their live shows. The boys also grew up hearing Hall & Oates, Michael Jackson, and Stevie Wonder around the house, and were fans of Marvin Gaye, Kate Bush, and the Beach Boys as well. Guy in particular is a big hip-hop head and grew up listening to A Tribe Called Quest, Busta Rhymes, and Gang Starr, while his admiration of beat-making legends like Jay Dilla and DJ Premier helped him learn to produce his own tracks. Disclosure's snare sounds are also directly influenced by rap music. Growing up, the two brothers lived in a house with instruments lying around everywhere, and they got to play whichever ones they wanted. They'd take their love of music into the classroom, too, as Guy and Howard, both self-proclaimed music nerds, studied music production at Reigate College. The duo released their first tracks, Offline Dexterity and Streetlight Chronicle, in 2010, when Guy and Howard were 18 and 15 respectively. Ironically, the brothers weren't big fans of pop music on the charts around that time, and ditto for dance music. In fact, Howard has said that he hated that genre when he was younger. His tastes leaned more towards singer-songwriters like Peter Gabriel, and the first album he ever bought was Seal's 1991 self-titled debut. Guy, meanwhile, was playing drums in an indie rock band whose sound he describes as a Foals Tame Impala hybrid. Things changed, however, when Guy discovered genres like house and dubstep while going out to nightclubs after turning 18, leading him to persuade his brother to make electronic music together. A track that helped cause that shift was Joy Orbison's 2009 classic, Hyph Mungo. That song blew Guy's mind when he heard it one night, And this, as well as songs by Burial, Mount Kimby, and James Blake, inspired him and Howard to make, quote, pop-structured songs in the style of house music and garage. That description is one the boys also preferred to being labeled a deep house act, for example. Speaking of garage, that's another genre whose influence looms large over Disclosure's music, even though Guy and Howard were both young kids during the genre's early 2000s heyday. It's a style the duo would return to later in their careers, and their music has even been classified as future garage. There's also the Disclosure face, originally designed by artist and illustrator Roxy Pandora, who unfortunately never received proper credit for it, and alleges she was promised otherwise. The face would become an instantly iconic emblem not only for Disclosure, but for dance music culture as a whole, and the logo remains a core component of the duo's marketing. In July of 2011, the two brothers dropped their debut EP featuring the two tracks Carnival and I Love That You Know. But their second EP, The Face, released less than a year later, would truly put the duo on the house music map. The brothers gained steam thanks in part to two The Face tracks, Boiling featuring singer Sinead Harnett, and What's in Your Head. 2012 would also see Guy and Howard play two Boiler Room sets, including one where they went back-to-back taking turns on the decks with dubstep pioneer Scream.
It's Scream and Disclosure in the Boiler Room!
They'd also proven themselves as skilled remixers during this time, flipping tracks by artists like Q-Tip and Janet Jackson. Their most well-known remix pre-2013, though, is Jessie Ware's Running, where the two brothers turned the Sade-like original into a fiery house banger that would eventually blow up on YouTube and SoundCloud.
Lost again, it's happening. When you're around, don't just go weak. All I wanna know is
all of this helped set the stage for Disclosure to bust down the doors of the pop and EDM worlds in a huge way in 2013, and they'd accomplished that with their debut album Settle. Let's break it down track by track.
It's spontaneous combustion, as I think is what they call it, right? And what happens is, when a fire starts to burn, right, and it starts to spread, she gonna bring that attitude.
As you saw at the start of the video, Settle opens with a spoken word sample from Eric Thomas, the hip-hop preacher. The decision to sample him was born out of the boys' frustration with their inability to secure a feature from a big-name American rapper, specifically someone like A$AP Rocky or Kendrick Lamar, for the album. Howard googled spoken word man Harlem, or motivational speaker from Harlem, he's told it a couple different ways, and found this video, even though Thomas is from Detroit. When the rap feature attempts fell through, they settled, pun intended, for this sample as the next best option. After the album intro samples a longer snippet of E.T. talking, the vocal loop on When a Fire Starts to Burn is a combination of various sound bites from the video I've been showing you, spliced together to make for a deliciously catchy hook over an instrumental pulling from old school Chicago house.
Spontaneous combustion, as I think is what they call it, right? And what happens is, when a fire starts to burn, right, and it starts to spread,
When a fire starts to burn, right, and it starts to spread,
if she got an attitude at work, 9 out of 10, she gonna bring that attitude home.
she gonna bring that attitude home.
Stop hanging around people who don't want to do nothing with their life.
Don't want to do nothing with their life.
Not only is it one hell of a way to set the tone for the rest of the album, the song remains one of Disclosure's signature tunes, expertly showcasing their skills at flipping samples into addictive, yet deceptively simple house tracks. The album's third track is also by far its most well-known. Backed by an unorthodox 6/8 time signature and lead vocals from a then unknown Sam Smith, who was working in a bar at the time and who Guy and Howard met via mutual friend and musical collaborator Jimmy Napes, Latch is a delectable slice of futuristic pop brilliance with an R&B and EDM edge. The track's instrumental was originally full of vocal samples. Smith asked for those samples to be removed so their vocal parts, finished within a single day, could replace them. The song was debuted by Annie Mac on her BBC Radio 1 show, and it didn't take long to explode from there. Following its October 2012 release, Latch would go on to peak at number 11 on the UK singles chart. It would perform even better across the Atlantic, charting at number 6 in Canada and number 7 in the States. Latch is a pristine pop song, and an experiment in how a mixture of EDM microgenres can successfully be sold to the masses, indicating Disclosure's knack for pop songwriting that they've since capitalized on for other artists. It also helped get the wheels in motion for Sam Smith's hugely successful solo career, and they remain a pop music force to this day.
I've been infected with restless whispers and cheats.
Here, Howard takes up lead vocals, and does a pretty admirable job of it too. The lyrics may be repetitive, but F for You, F meaning fool that is, still showcases how Disclosure can make absolute magic out of simple and relatively minimalistic song structures.
Because I played the fool for ya.
It's sophisticated, it's polished yet raw all the same, and it's a quintessential Disclosure track. In fact, they opened many of their concerts with it during the Settle era. Though the song is perfectly fine with just Howard singing it, the duo eventually released a remix with vocals from none other than Mary J. Blige. Mary came across the original track and was smitten by it, so she requested the song's parts to add new vocals over. She's even compared Disclosure's sound to the house music she loved growing up in the 80s, and she'd work with Guy and Howard again on her 2014 single Right Now, co-written by Sam Smith.
Telling you right now, I'm telling you right now, no.
The city of Detroit is a huge influence on Guy and Howard, and White Noise has the Motor City deep within its DNA. This absolute banger of a track bursts with attitude and pop sensibilities from start to finish, with an icy but funky house beat and Aluna's soft, almost childlike vocals. It didn't hurt that Aluna George were in peak musical form themselves at the time either.
Some people want me to be heads up down.
The White Noise video is even filmed in Detroit, with its main character wearing a Michigan Wolverines varsity jacket to boot. It's a great callback to the origin of some of Guy and Howard's biggest influences, backed by a pulsating, urgent song that remains one of Disclosure's most iconic.
Just noise, white noise.
The track itself shows electric chemistry between Disclosure and Aluna George, especially considering Aluna was convinced to sing on it after she'd heard only the bass riff. Says Guy, quote, "With White Noise, we had the session booked with Aluna, and the day came around and we had just come off tour for a month or two. We had absolutely nothing to show her. I had one little bass riff and she was like, I like that."
Defeated, no more.
Buoyed gorgeously by the vocals of Friendly Fire's frontman Ed McFarlane, Defeated No More is a considerably slower and groovier tone shift for the album. This is also hugely surprising if you know anything about Ed McFarlane of Friendly Fires. I mean, have you seen the guy dance before? Instead, here we have McFarlane and the Brothers Lawrence with a mid-tempo and wobbly yet irresistibly smooth and sensual take on R&B, with a touch of deep house and UK bass. I love how the synth stabs are used during the hook, and McFarlane's voice fits the track like a glove. Defeated No More is one of the more underrated tracks in Disclosure's entire discography that, in my view, doesn't get its share of flowers compared to other songs on Settle. This track is also the first on Settle where the boys' garage influence, notably speed garage, really shows itself. Sampling Jill Scott's early 2000s hit A Long Walk, Stimulation isn't one of the flashier songs on the album compared to, say, Latch or White Noise, but it's where Guy and Howard's intrinsically raw and underground sides come through. It's yet another example of how expertly Disclosure can take short vocal samples, chop them up, add some sick bass lines, and build an entire house banger around those singular, minimalistic, and often repetitive elements. In many ways, it's comparable to the sampling style of a producer like Armand Van Helden, another pillar in the house and garage world, who you may also recognize as one half of Duck Sauce.
You know what I mean?
There are voices in my head, and my heart is trying hard to.
The beat for Voices feels not entirely like house, but also not fully garage either. Whatever it is, the execution is sublime. Vocalist Sasha Keeble makes the track her own, while Guy and Howard's production pulls greatly from garage and UK funky house to make for a sleek, catchy, and hugely enjoyable tune that was frankly unlucky to become the 7th and final single from the album. The boys' production is tight as usual, the synths in particular elevate it significantly, and Sasha's vocals add a whole other layer of intensity and personality to the song. The end result is a track that remains one of the bounciest and most fun in Disclosure's catalog. Based around a sample of Get Along With You by Khalees, whom the boys would eventually work with on their 2020 single Watch Your Step, Second Chance is by far the shortest and possibly bassiest non-intro song on Settle's tracklist at only 2 minutes and 27 seconds in length. But it's got the woozy and atmospheric synths Guy and Howard are known for, and still fits within the general mood of the album. The Khalees sample is also an interesting case study in how the boys flip and reinvent old recordings. The track never truly explodes, and doesn't have a lot of time for itself to really develop musically, but it's a welcome detour for the album, and a window into Guy and Howard's more esoteric side. The city of Detroit has influenced the Lawrence brothers hugely, specifically Motown, techno, and J Dilla. The latter's voice is sampled on Grab Her, chopping up bits of his vocals on The Look of Love Part 2 by his group Slum Village, rearranged to make it sound like he's saying grab her.
No need for that, I get down with rap. Yo, what is the look of?
Like I said earlier, Guy is a big hip-hop fan, and this feels like a neat callback to Dilla's own sampling techniques, such as when he flipped a sample of the Singers Unlimited's cover of Gilbert O'Sullivan's Claire to make it sound like it's saying players. Grab Her is a minimal but no less bouncy and upbeat track, not unlike Stimulation. It's simplistic in how it constantly repeats those chopped up and strategically manipulated snippets of Dilla's voice, but with tracks like these, simplicity is the point. Grab Her is a song meant to get people on the dance floor, ideally with a drink in hand and nary a care in the world. UK Garage's influence, specifically the two-step sound from the early aughts, burns brightest on this track featuring English folk pop singer-songwriter Eliza Doolittle. No, not Audrey Hepburn and My Fair Lady. You and Me is catchy, it's pulsating, Eliza's vocals add a new layer of energy to the instrumental, the melody fits a garage beat nicely, its video of a traveling couple is a fun watch, and it remains one of the most memorable tracks on Settle. Oh, and then Flume remixed it.
Gonna be you and me.
We cannot talk about You and Me without also discussing that remix, whose popularity far exceeds that of the original. Having just come off the release of a stellar self-titled debut album, Aussie producer Flume takes this song and flips it upside down, turning a throwback garage track into a head-nodding, festival-devouring future bass anthem, one that remains a staple in Flume's own live shows. Guy and Howard may never hear a better remix of one of their tunes again. Possibly the most underrated track on the album in my opinion, January features Jamie Woon, who was best known at the time for singles like Night Air and Lady Luck. January is also notably the first feature Jamie's ever done in his career, and he's only worked with 5 other artists in the years since. I'm glad Jamie hopped on the track at all, as he makes it entirely his own, while Guy and Howard's touch is still abundantly obvious. The synths are warm and piercing at the same time, the overall vibe is seductive and hypnotic, and the track fits the album as a whole extremely well. Settle's companion remix album would see January be flipped by a then fledgling young Canadian producer named Kate Renata. Maybe he'd be a cool artist to do a video on someday. Disclosure taps yet another buzzy feature for this track, Jessie Ware, who was Guy and Howard's label mate at the time and who'd been known for her collaborations with Subtract as well as her 2012 debut album Devotion. Of course, there's that remix of her song Running I talked about earlier too. Though Howard is heard singing vocals during the hook, Confess to Me is very much the Jessie Ware show.
Confess to me, make me feel.
Not only is it another example of how skilled Disclosure are in meshing their beats with guest singers who complement them beautifully, Confess to Me also notably predates Jessie Ware eventually leaning fully into dance music to huge critical acclaim with her albums What's Your Pleasure and That Feels Good.
Talk to me. Watch me.
The album's final track and fifth single is also by far its smoothest, and carries the biggest emotional pull. London Grammar frontwoman Hannah Reid's vocals are gorgeous and haunting, and the beat's hypnotic mid-tempo swing feels like an appropriate mood for an album closer. You can hear a sense of urgency and vulnerability in how Reid sings and how Guy and Howard built the song's ethereal backdrop. Help Me Lose My Mind is also noticeably more R&B focused, perhaps foreshadowing the direction their 2015 sophomore album Chronicles would take. As far as Settle though, I can't think of a better song to close that chapter with, capping off a triumphant body of work by two guys from small-town England who were only 22 and 19 years of age respectively upon its release. Settle dropped June 3rd, 2013 on PMR and Island Records in the UK, with its US release coming the week after on Cherry Tree and Interscope. Debuting at #1 on the UK album charts, it would also be shortlisted for the Mercury Prize, losing to James Blake's Overgrown. At the 2014 Grammys, Settle would score a nomination for Best Dance Electronic Album, with that award being won by Daft Punk's Random Access Memories. Internationally, Settle peaked at #5 in Australia and #8 in Belgium, though it would only get as high as #36 on the US Billboard 200. Settle was met with immense critical acclaim and accolades, even getting a 9.1 score from Pitchfork, though its reviewer would later claim on Twitter that the album hasn't aged well. A companion remix album, Settle the Remixes, came out in December of that year. That album featured a new song with Sam Smith, Together, while also tapping the aforementioned Flume and Kaytranada, as well as Bauer, Hudson Mohawk, and DJ Premier, one of Guy's biggest influences, to reinvent their songs.
My shadow doesn't show in the dark.
Disclosure's career in the decade since Settle has seen its share of highs and lows. Their second album, 2015's Chronicles, is considered a disappointment by fans and critics. Though it's an ambitious album in scale and boasts big-name features from artists like Lorde and The Weeknd, it also packs too many of those features onto one project. It's not bereft of bouncy house tracks. Holding On featuring Gregory Porter and Hourglass with Lion Babe are good examples of that. But Chronicles did lean a little too far toward Guy and Howard's pop and R&B side, and lacked the fundamentally dance-oriented approach Settle had. Perhaps this was to capitalize on the pop success of Latch, even bringing back Sam Smith, who by then was a household name, for the single Omen. Post-Chronicles, Disclosure would release multiple individual singles experimenting with a wide range of genres and sounds. The boys would ultimately go 5 years between studio albums before releasing 2020's Energy. That album saw them circle back more toward their club roots with some serious bangers like Duha Mali Mali featuring Fatoumata Diawara and Lavender with Channel Tress.
She addicted to groove. That's how I get her.
We don't even hear much of their R&B side until the penultimate track Birthday, featuring Sid and Kalani.
Did I call you on your birthday?
Energy's title track also sees them link up once again with the hip-hop preacher Eric Thomas.
You got more, you could do more, you could see more, you could be more.
Despite the less pop-focused approach relative to Chronicles, Energy as a whole still isn't quite at Settle's level. In July of last year, Disclosure released the follow-up, Alchemy, a significantly more stripped-back project than its predecessors, and one with no features. It still doesn't come close to the heights of Settle, but classic high-energy house tunes like Simply Won't Do and Looking for Love definitely have well-earned places in the Disclosure canon. In a way, Settle foreshadowed dance music trends in the next couple years to come, specifically in the UK, where songs with a striking deep house influence would see greater chart success. Even EDM titans like Calvin Harris incorporated a bigger deep house influence around this time. Less aggressive or maximalist styles of electronic music would also take off in that era, specifically tropical house and future house, as louder, bassier, noisier, and more hyped up EDM sounds started declining commercially. Disclosure made a classic dance album while staying faithful to many of the genre's most baseline elements. Settle takes the sonic blueprint of forefathers like Burial and Joy Orbison and flips it into something cleaner and less rough around the edges, but no less brilliant and still very much a love letter to UK club culture. It's unabashedly a dance record, and one from a genre far better known for standalone singles and EPs than for fully conceptualized albums. With Settle, Guy and Howard took their lifelong dedication to loving and learning about music, fused pop together with bassy, bouncy underground club genres, and showed what a sublime body of work within those sonic parameters could look and sound like. After all, that's what can happen whenever an artist causes a fire to start to burn and then start to spread. Thank you so much for watching. What do you think of this album? Do you think Disclosure can make another record as good as Settle? Did I forget anything about Disclosure's story that you feel is important? Which other artists and albums do you want to see me make videos like this about? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, don't forget to like, comment, and share, as well as subscribe to my channel and watch my first few videos about Canadian hip-hop's history and my ideal Talking Heads reunion set list. This has been Sound and Vision, and I'll see you next time.